Hello. Hello and welcome. So glad that you came. You're all the true Canadians who braved this first snowfall, likely drove here without your winter tires on yet. So thanks so much for coming, for making it. We're so glad that you're here. So you're here today to learn about the state of the world's refugees. And so before we begin, I would like to start with a bit of a migration activity and get you a little bit warmed up. So please stand if you were not born in Canada. Stay standing. I'm sitting right now. Please stand if your parents were not born in Canada. Stay standing. Take a look around. Please stand if your grandparents were not born in Canada. If your great-grandparents were not born in Canada. So if you take a look around, that's almost the entire room standing. You can have a seat. So when talking about forced migration, I think it's always important to recognize the history of the land that we currently find ourselves on, and the reality that unless you are of Indigenous descent, we were all welcomed or let into Canada at some point in our ancestral history. And so what has been done to the Indigenous people of Canada, the UN considers genocide, and we all have a role to play in decolonizing the future of our country. And so part of that begins by recognizing that this meeting today is being held on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and most recently the Haudenosaunee peoples who continue to have an unresolved interest in the lands within the 6 miles of the Grand River. We find ourselves on the Haldimand Tract, which spans 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, from source to mouth, and is covered by the Covenant of the Dish with One Spoon, which calls us as settlers, newcomers, and First Peoples to share the land in peace, recognizing that we all eat from the same dish. We recognize the tension of being settlers who are welcoming newcomers onto this land, and we seek to continue working towards reconciliation among our nations. And so today you will learn about the state of the world's refugees from Jean-Nicolas, the UNHCR representative to Canada, whom I will introduce to you formally shortly. We'll begin with the global perspective on the refugee crisis, then focus in on Canada, recognizing that it is one of the few countries in the world that is open to welcoming and supporting refugees with medical needs. And this is where you will hear from Dr. Mike, founder and director of Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre, which is a local organization that is currently supporting over 3,000 refugee newcomer patients in our community. So we'll gain a deeper understanding of the healthcare challenges that are faced by the refugees who arrive and the Canadian organizations and systems that provide and navigate effective support. Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre is an incredible organization leading the way in Canada in the ways that it provides holistic support to refugee newcomers. And as their tagline reads, Sanctuary is a place for healing, hope, and well-being. And while a trip to a doctor's office is not something the average Canadian looks forward to, let me tell you that Sanctuary regularly receives visits from clients who just pop in to say hello because they love being there. They've made friends, they feel welcome, and they feel taken care of. Holistic care through relationships is at the core of what their team provides every day. And so thank you for being here today, for taking the time to learn about a very important need in our world and about a local organization that you can support who is responding to this need in an incredible way. I would like to thank our event partners, the Centre for International Governance Innovation, CG for short, for providing this beautiful venue, to Mennonite Central Committee Ontario, who I work for providing me. and to the Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Centre, who provides community service workers directly to Sanctuary. And at this time, I'd like to invite Una Fitzgerald, the director of the International Law Research Program, to bring greetings on behalf of CG.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many people here. You know, I loved your little demonstration that we're all basically immigrants to this country. When I was a little girl and I knew we were moving to Canada, I was really excited about the bugs. So when we came and I discovered snow in such large quantities as we had in Canada, that was even more exciting than the bugs. So just be glad we're having snow and not having a storm of locusts or something. So on behalf of the Centre for International Governance Innovation, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here for this interesting dialogue about the state of the world's refugees. As Kaylee mentioned, I'm the director of CG's International Law Research Program, and we work to connect knowledge, policy, and practice on how international law is brought to bear on significant global issues. My background is in international human rights law, and I have an abiding interest in refugee law since two of my first and formative jobs, which really got me interested in international law, were working at the former Immigration Appeal Board and the Department of Justice, helping to sort out the practical and legal implications of an important Supreme Court decision. This was a long time ago. It was when the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was brand spanking new, and the court had just declared in the Singh case that any person physically in Canada, and in this case it was a refugee claimant, was entitled to the protection of the Charter, and that this meant that they were entitled to an oral hearing for the determination of their refugee claim. Well, the International Law Research Program doesn't do much work on refugee issues. We focus on international economic law, environmental law, intellectual property, and Indigenous peoples law. And I would just like to thank Kaylee for the wonderful introduction about the lands we're on today of the Six Nations in the Haldimand Tract. But you know, even in the work that we do in these areas, we've noticed a number of issues very much related to immigration and refugees. So we're seeing the issue of climate change crises leading to the movement of people, because crops won't grow, or armed conflict is developing over shortages of water and that sort of thing. We're also seeing the issue about how corporations have freedom of movement around the world. We do a lot of work on international trade, but there's no such thing as freedom of movement of people. So goods and corporations can move, but not people, and that presents a lot of injustice, really. And then another area we've noticed is that Indigenous peoples find that their communities have been split by colonial borders. So, you know, there are Indigenous people in Canada who have relatives in the US, or folks in the US who have relatives in Mexico, and they have to deal with those issues. So besides the law program, there's also the Global Policy and Security Program, Politics and Security Program, and the Global Economics Program at CG. And one of the very important issues that CG is currently looking at in the Global Security and Politics group is the issue of the global refugee crisis. Last year, CG launched the World Refugee Council to convene thought leaders and innovators from around the globe to discuss, debate, and reframe how the international community can best respond to this crisis and come up with practical solutions. For the past year, the Council has engaged in deliberations and commissioned major academic research on responses to refugees and displaced persons. And you can find these papers on the website for the World Refugee Council. Under the leadership of former Canadian Minister Lloyd Axworthy, the Council is an independent global body composed of over 20 political leaders, including 2 former heads of government and 3 foreign policy ministers, policy advisors, academic experts, a Nobel Prize winner, and civil society actors and human rights activists from around the world. There are many knowledgeable people working on refugee and displacement issues, but the value added of the Council is a unique perspective of high-level political leaders from most of the regions in the world. Importantly, the work of the World Refugee Council seeks to complement the UN's efforts to reform and sort of modernize the refugee process. So the new Global Compact on refugees and the Global Compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. Now, the International Law Research Program, which is funded by Jim Balsillie and the province of Ontario, likes to focus on issues that are international, but we always see it in terms of concentric circles of impact and influence, from the very local to the provincial, national, regional, and international levels, and then in the reverse. So in Canada, as Kaylee demonstrated so beautifully today, we, the settlers, are recent first, second, or third generation immigrants with linkages to homelands far away and visceral awareness of how power politics, armed conflict, and environmental crises impact on all of humanity. Being bombarded by world news, living in a globalized world provides us with choices to disengage and isolate or engage and act in solidarity. On the community level, therefore, we at CG are really delighted to partner with the Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre for this event. And we look forward to hearing from Dr. Mike Stephenson about important local engagement and Jean-Nicolas Beuze about national and international efforts to provide much needed assistance and support to refugees. I hope you enjoy this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Una. I would like to now welcome our Member of Parliament for Kitchener South Hespeler, Marwan Tabara. He will come up and share some words of welcome. And MP Tabara is also a member of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, and we are honored to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for braving that weather. My staff member, Ellen, mentioned to me she wanted to carpool today. She said she'd feel safer if we carpooled, and then as soon as we drove out of her parking lot, I went through a stop sign. So I said, "Are you sure you feel safe now?" So, but we made it here safe and sound. But I want to thank, first and foremost, CG for putting on such a great event, alongside with Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre. Dr. Mike, thank you very much. The World Refugee Council has also testified at the committee that I represented up in Ottawa, and we've learned so much from their testimony, and we look forward to fulfilling our report on global migration. And it was a great testimony that we can add to our knowledge. Also, I want to thank Jean-Nicolas Beuze. You've testified many times at the committee, and your expertise has informed our committee and our government as well. Also, the Central Mennonite Committee, I want to thank you for all the hard work, and all the other agencies that here in our region that have welcomed over 50,000 refugees in Canada and over hundreds of families here in our region. They've been settling in our region and have been integrated in our region and have felt welcome because of your efforts. So I want to thank you very, very much for that. I also want to bring greetings on my colleagues as well. Bardish Chagger, who is the MP of Waterloo, and Raj Saini. Unfortunately, they had other commitments tonight, but they send their regrets. As mentioned by Kaylee, I sit on the Citizenship and Immigration Committee and also the International Human Rights Committee. It's kind of great that I'm on both committees because they do intertwine. You see a lot of the instabilities and the atrocities that is happening around the world, and you can see because of those instabilities in certain countries that you're seeing a large wave of migrants seeking refuge around the world. There's 25 million refugees around the world, around 40 million IDPs, and I know, Jean-Nicolaa, you'll be going into more stats about that as well. But also, too, if you look at economic migrants, because sometimes, as Jean-Nicolaa would know, it's tough for some governments to sell, telling the benefits about refugees. But we also want to add in economic migrants as well. And if we look at the numbers, under the UN Migration Report in 2017, in 2000 there was 173 migrants traveling around the world seeking for better prosperity. In 2017, that number is now at 258 million. So we're seeing not only refugees, but economic migrants. And if I go back to refugees, a little bit about my story. I was born in Beirut, Lebanon during the civil war, similar to what's happening a little bit now in Syria. And we've seen a lot of Lebanese just left to different countries to seek refuge, to seek for a better life, similar with Syrians. Right now, today in Lebanon, they are hosting 1 in 4 individuals there are refugees. So they're holding a lot of the weight. And I think as Western democracies, I think we can do more. We should do more. There's a lot of countries that are around, countries that are unstable, like Syria that has the civil war. Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan are taking the brunt of a lot of these refugees, along with Italy and Greece. So I think Western democracies can do more, and I think there is room. And I think after today, some of the speakers will outline maybe what more we can do. And collectively, we've done such great work. I know this community has done such great work, and I will continue to advocate on your behalf. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the speakers and see what more we can do to welcome more refugees, integrate them, and to share success stories with our neighbors here in Canada, and to share success stories that we can outline to the rest of the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Tabara. So I now have the privilege of introducing you to 2 incredible men who will lead the main portion of this presentation. Jean-Nicolaa will come up first, and then Dr. Mike will join him for an interactive discussion, after which you will have the opportunity to ask questions directly to our presenters. So as you're listening, be thinking about some questions you might want to ask. So a little bit about Jean-Nicolaa. He has worked for more than 20 years with the United Nations in the areas of human rights, peacekeeping, and UNICEF at headquarters and in the field, including placements in Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Afghanistan, and the Middle East and North African regions. He joined the UNHCR in Lebanon as the Deputy Representative for Protection and Interagency Coordination, and is now the UNHCR representative in Canada. And on a more or less professional note, I haven't told him this yet, but the first time I heard Jean-Nicolas speak, the first thing I noticed was the awesome scarf that he was wearing. You'll notice he's wearing a scarf tonight too, so he's got great style. Subsequently, Dr. Mike, as he is known, will come up. He is the founder and director of Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre. He has dedicated his career to refugee health since he began his residency in 2006. Dr. Mike started the Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre with 6 patients in 2013 and has worked tirelessly to grow the clinic to more than 3,000 patients and dozens of staff and volunteers today. His work has been recognized with a Kitchener Mayor's City Builder Award in 2016 and a Council Award from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Ontario in 2017. So join me in welcoming Jean-Nicolaa.
Thank you. Thank God I'm wearing a scarf. Coming from Afghanistan, actually. No, it's a great pleasure for me to be with you today. And I'm sure that if I was going to ask you to stand up, if you are a refugee, or if you have sponsored a refugee, or if you have been involved in supporting refugees, probably 99% of the room will stand up. So I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I know that there's a wealth of information here. Let me start, before moving to the big picture, to reflect on my day here in Kitchener-Waterloo. KW, as I learned this morning. I think it's quite incredible, and I want to piggyback on what my friend Marwan said on the fact that this community has been especially committed to the issue of refugees. I knew that before coming here. I came here 6 months ago. I met some of you, perhaps. And today was really an example of how people in this city, in this region, have gone an extra mile to try to make a difference for refugees. We started with, in the morning, with the Sanctuary Clinic, and we'll hear more about it with Dr. Might. It's really a unique example here in Canada of having what we call in the humanitarian jargon a one-stop shop, where you come perhaps for your back pain, but you leave the place with not only perhaps a medication for your back pain, but also some orientation about how you can help your children to integrate better in school, or how you can benefit from a social worker who will help you find a better accommodation, and so on and so forth. So it's really something that UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is very happy to be associated tonight in this event, because that's something we fully support, and I hope that you will also, and most of you have probably already supported the clinic, but continue your support for the Sanctuary Clinic. We had opportunities to meet with the Mennonite, and it's incredible to see how the communities have come together to support the integration, to sponsor refugees, to use the famous BVOR, this blended program, which comes from the referral of UNHCR for the most vulnerable refugees to have a chance to rebuild their life here. We had the opportunity to interact with CG, which is doing a great job in supporting the World Refugee Council in trying to find innovation on tackling this big issue of having 25 million refugees and 40 million internally displaced. And we do all realize that if we want to be able to protect people, but also perhaps more importantly, or equally importantly, to find durable solutions for them, we need to think a little bit different. The humanitarian workers putting a band-aid on an open wound may not be sufficient. It's certainly the first things we need to do, but we need to rethink perhaps how we address the issue of tackling this massive displacement crisis that we are witnessing. I had the chance to meet Marwan actually the first time in Lebanon, where I was posted, and he came on a high-level delegation at the time with the Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Dion. And since then, I had the pleasure to interact with him at the CIM, the Committee on Immigration and Citizenship of the Parliament. And you really have a strong advocate for refugees and for your communities and all the good work that you are doing back in Ottawa. And that's something we need to really flag, because these days, some politicians will hesitate sticking their neck in favor of refugees. And we really need, with your support, politicians who still believe in the cause of refugees. And Marwan is definitely one of our strong allies in Ottawa. So that's for my introduction here today. And I'm with my colleagues Michael over here. And we really appreciate, and I hope we'll have some discussion about what your communities are doing for refugees here, but also how you get involved with refugees abroad. So that's the sideway to my the main topic. The numbers have been said by Marwan in particular, and I'm sure you all know them. 25 million refugees, 40 million internally displaced, so people who are in the same situation as refugees, but who didn't have a chance or who decided not to cross an international border to become refugees. It's quite a traumatic event for people to leave their home. It's even more of a traumatic event to leave their home country. So quite a number of refugees have been displaced in their own country many times before crossing an international borders. I was placed in Lebanon, and this community has received a lot of Syrians. Syrians were displaced 3 times in Syria, within Syria, before jumping on the other side of the border, whether in Lebanon, in Turkey, or in Jordan. They preferred, they really try as long as possible to stay within their own country. But I think we need to look at the two groups together, so it makes 65 million people on the move, forcibly displaced. One thing that perhaps is not that well known is that between 2016 and 2017, we had the highest increase of refugees in a single year. We increased the number by 3 million. And that was the highest increase in a single year since the Second World War, when we started to really monitor closely the numbers. Why? Mainly because of the Syria situation, to some extent Iraq, which is still the largest producing, Syria is still the largest producing countries in terms of refugees. 6 million Syrians are outside their country as we speak. Mainly in the neighboring countries, more than 3 million, 3.5 million in Turkey, a bit more than 1 million in Lebanon, probably 800 or 600, between 600 and 800,000 in Jordan. It's still the number one source of refugee flows. But one thing that people may not know is that our second largest population of refugees, I'm going to ask you the question. Do you know who is the second largest population of refugees in the world? Where they are coming from? Afghanistan, indeed. You are very well informed. We tend to forget that we still have probably more than 2.5 million Afghans who are still outside their country of origin, mainly in Pakistan and in Iran. And those have been there for 30 years. And when was the last time we heard about the Afghan refugees? When was the last time that CBC, Globe and Mail, or what, the Kitchener reporter or whatever spoke about the Afghan refugees? If we look at other population of refugees which have been kind of a bit forgotten, we're speaking about Somali refugees who have been in the camps in Kenya for 30 years as well, 30, 40 years. We're really speaking about the third generation of people born in exile. So it's not only the children who are born in exile, in camps in particular, but it's the parents of those children were already born in camps. Imagine a little bit what that means in terms of the situation in which they are. One other situation that we tend to forget is somewhat because of the emphasis on the Syrian refugee crisis, because of the big number and the implication in terms of the stability of the Middle East, and definitely I'm European, as you have guessed with my lovely French accent. The impact on Europe of the Syria crisis has been quite visible. But we tend to forget that last year, in 2017, we had 1 million South Sudanese who crossed into northern Uganda. Again, when was the last time we really heard about South Sudan? When was the last time we heard about Uganda keeping their border open and accepting 1 million South Sudanese and trying to integrate them by giving them actually plot of lands, by ensuring that the kids will be able to integrate into the public school, the Ugandan public school. I spent 2 years in Uganda, in the north of the country, so at the border with South Sudan. And the Muzungu, which means the white man, some will know, you speak Swahili. The Muzungu, the white man, with in comparison to the local population, had a lot of cash in his pocket, was still, for 2 years, showering with a bucket of water. And I'm always using this example because if I, with all the means I had, still had to use a bucket of water to shower in the morning, imagine what it means for the local population and what it means for those 1 million South Sudanese refugees who definitely didn't have the same financial means as me. Imagine the pressure on potable water, the competition between the host communities, the Ugandans who are in this part of the country which has been quite deprived of development, and those South Sudanese who come after having witnessed destruction of their villages, perhaps having been raped, perhaps having been maimed, and arriving in a concentration like northern Uganda, and still the two communities are getting along. It's not that easy always, but are still really welcoming their brother and sister, and the government has taken the risk, but the political courage to actually say, we are going to integrate those South Sudanese. But those situations tend to be more and more forgotten because every 6 months there's a new crisis. What is the latest refugee crisis which come to your mind when we speak about refugee situation? Which one is the last one that you will? The caravan? Rohingya? Venezuela. So it's interesting because, again, it shows that you are extremely well informed here in Kitchener-Waterloo. I think the Rohingya really hit a lot of people because we saw the desperation, we saw those women, those elderly people being carried out by younger Rohingya crossing into Bangladesh. We know the number, 700,000 Rohingya crossed in 6 weeks. End of August to end of September, mid-August to end of September, 6 weeks, 700,000 people escaped the Rakhine state where they were being persecuted, being subjected to violence, villages being burned down. We have heard of a lot of testimonies of rape, of beatings, of killings. But 700,000 people who suddenly arrived in Cox's Bazar, one of the poorest part of Bangladesh, but also one of the most densely population on planet Earth, already with the Bangladeshi. So we heard a little bit about the Rohingya, but we are 1 year down the line for the Rohingya crisis, a bit more, September, we are in November, and surprisingly, we are still missing almost 60% of the funding that we need to help the Rohingya. So the attention span of the international community, of those who decide about international aid, has been rather limited in the case of the Rohingya, because a year later, we're still missing 60% of the money we need to provide the basic support to those families. I'm glad that you mentioned Venezuela, because I think, and we were having those discussions just now, we are not, there's not enough attention, including in Canada, in my view, on what's happening in your backyard, in our backyard here. It's 5,000 Venezuelans every day who are leaving their country. As we speak, it's 4,000 Venezuelans who are entering Peru on a daily basis. And if you have the map of South America in your mind, Venezuela, Peru. It's really not the next door country. You need to go through Colombia, you need to cross into Ecuador, and then you will reach Peru. So it's a long trip, which is done by women, children, elderly, person with disabilities, a lot of pregnant women, or a lot of women with young children are leaving the country because of lack of access to maternal health, basic health care. 1 million have reached Colombia, 500,000 are in Peru, and the flow, the outflow is definitely not stopping. The caravan, that's an interesting one, because the caravan had a lot of attention by the media, was largely used in the midterm election on the other side of the border. But if you look at the number, we are speaking in the first caravan about 4,000 people. The second caravan, it's perhaps 2,500 people. In comparison, I repeat, Peru receives 4,000 Venezuelans every day. What has been also sometimes misrepresented is who is in the caravan. There's been a lot of intentional mixing of the different concepts and presenting those people as potential security threat or criminal or people who were looking just for better opportunities, a better job. Actually, what is happening in the north of Central America, so Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, where I was earlier this year, is really a situation of extreme violence, which is really plaguing a large number of communities, where the state, even when they are willing to address those issues, are completely overcome by the magnitude of those criminal gangs, the capacity of those criminal gangs to control territories, to control villages, to control neighborhoods, and to use all kinds of forms of violence to intimidate the population. So it's raping young girls, it's beating up young men who do not want to join the criminal gang. It's imposing tax on the families, on anyone who has a little business and trying to extort money. And if you don't pay, you get beaten up, death threat, kidnapping, and so on. So within this caravan, we have actually people who are not looking for a better life. They're just looking to save their life. And we tend sometimes to be taken away from who are behind the numbers. What are the individual stories behind the numbers of those big refugee crises? And we should not forget that behind every single number, there is an individual story. A lot of stories are of suffering. A lot of stories are of people fleeing bombs, conflict. We tend to forget that refugees are not only people who are fleeing those situations of conflict like Syria, Iraq, or extreme generalized violence and like Myanmar or the north of Central America, but also people who have been persecuted on an individual basis for who they are, what they think, who they pray, who are their partners. We tend to forget that in a number of countries, being in the opposition, being part of a religious minority or an ethnic minority, being a human rights defender, a lawyer who take cases of domestic violence or who fight against corruption by the state, or people having a different sexual orientation or gender identity are persecuted and cannot get the benefit of the protection of the states. And those need to be received equally as those fleeing the conflict and the bomb or the generalized violence as refugees in other countries, including in Canada. I'm just going to make a move towards the issues of health, because that's really what it is about tonight, and so that we can celebrate the great work of Sanctuary. For us, UNHCR, and it's the UN Refugee Agency, and it's the same for our partners, whether it's the NGOs, Save the Children, Oxfam, Médecins Sans Frontières, UNICEF, all the partners, we really, really struggle with providing basic healthcare to our refugees. We simply do not have the money. I was mentioning that in the case of the Rohingya refugees, we are missing 60% of the funding that we need to support refugees. So when you have only $4 out of 10, the $4 is really used first for food and potable water, a shelter, a roof above your head, perhaps a bit of support for children to go to schools, but we simply cannot afford to treat refugees who have chronic disease, medical condition. We do focus on communicable disease, because of course, if we have one refugee with a communicable disease, it can very rapidly spread to the whole community. Not only the refugees, but also the host communities, the local population. And then you have tension being created by this idea that the refugee brought whatever is the disease. So we cannot afford to not tackle issues of communicable disease. But I want to stress one point, is that when we receive refugees throughout the world who may have diabetes, elderly people who may have a heart condition, somebody who may have a cancer, and who may have been treated for cancer in his or her country of origin, but in displacement, arrives and wants to be treated, continue the treatment for cancer. People who need dialysis, people who need HIV/AIDS treatment. Our response is that, sorry, go back home, we cannot help you. We simply do not have the money, the funding. It's not that we don't want to do it. It's not that we don't want to save life. It's not that we do not understand the consequences of leaving those refugees without proper medical attention. It's simply we don't have the money. And we were with Dr. Mike at a meeting in Ottawa not so long ago, where we discussed those chronic disease, non-communicable disease. And one of them that I will always use now in my little speech is diabetes. We were with Diabetes Canada, who was explaining what are the factors which contribute to diabetes, and I'm speaking under the authority of Dr. Mike, but if I well understood, your diet, your stress level, your larger well-being, where you live, are all factors which influence your risk of having diabetes. If you think a minute about who are the refugees, they tick all the boxes. They don't eat well, because simply they don't have the money to afford a varied nutritional basket. Refugees in Lebanon, for example, Syrian refugees, they eat a lot of naan, the bread, with a lot of tea, with a lot of sugar to keep them going, and that's basically it. The stress of having been displaced, the stress of being in an environment where they are not always sure that they are going to be welcome, the stress of not knowing whether the kids will go to school, the stress of being arrested because you don't have legal paper to move around, all that contribute to probably a high percentage of our population with diabetes. We don't even try to test them, because testing them will be raising the expectation in terms of what we can do to address the issue, and we know that we cannot pay for those treatment. So one of the issues that we try to do as UNHCR is really to refer the most vulnerable cases, including some who may have medical conditions that we cannot treat in Lebanon, Jordan, Tanzania, Mexico, or elsewhere, to a generous country like Canada, and see whether Canada will be able to accept them and provide this medical care, which unfortunately we cannot provide. So therefore, having a partner like Sanctuary is really key for us, and there are other organizations in other parts of the country. We also rely a lot on public services, health services, to make sure that the refugees can get the attention that they deserve, to find solution in third country like Canada, where we cannot find solution where refugees find asylum first. I'm just going to conclude by one thing. is that, and you will know it because most of you have had contact, maybe some of you are refugees, most of you had had contact with refugees. Providing a solution in Canada is a life-saving intervention. Providing, if you are a sponsor and you sponsor a refugee, in particular through the BVOR program, this blended program, providing support to refugees who are resettled through the government because of their vulnerabilities, their specific needs, is really a life-saving intervention. And we are very grateful for all your commitment to the refugees, to this population. Make sure that you keep in mind that any one of you can do something for refugees, and I've seen that, witnessed that today with all the partners we have met. I'm quite moved by all not the little, because they are not little, the local, that's the word, the local initiative or the individual initiative of most of many Canadians handing their hands to help refugees. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm really very much looking forward to interacting with you on some of those issues or any other topics that you want to discuss in relation to refugees. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your support. I really call upon you all to support Sanctuary, to get involved with refugees, to sponsor refugees, because it's something which is very much needed. And here Canadians are showing a leadership that unfortunately these days we are missing in many parts of the world. So thank you for your engagement. Merci. Michael is reminding me that we have just a very short video which will illustrate the issue of why we struggle providing medical care to refugees and why Canada is such an important partner in this respect.
magacayga deeqan nuur salaad waxaan ku nool yahay kalbiyey waxaa imaaday sanadka hore bishii January taariikh 17 kilada subax hal 2 saac waan cirbada la duraa gurigan aada waxaa imaaday hadda 12 saac hadda waa la cabira hadda waa la duraa subax iyo galab waa imaadaa.
Due to limited resources, UNHCR and its health partners tends to focus on provision of comprehensive primary health care. And in this, we are mainly focusing on communicable diseases, which form about 85% of the morbidity that we see in various facilities. However, we have a subset of the population that mainly have non-communicable diseases, which we estimate form about 15% of the patients that we see.
hawsha waxa ani asaga noo dhaxeeyo male waa aniga asiga waa ogyahay caafimaadkii baan la socda waxaan ka gaari karaa waan qabsanaya waa nin ii maqan qof ii jooga male waa aniga asaga bis guriga waxa ku nool ilkay uu ku nool yahay waa surguntaas dhibka waa qudaarta ambooga uma heli kari waxaan u heli karay waxaan u haaya male inay la saacideeyaan rabaa.
So for patients with chronic illnesses to live a normal life and actualize their full potential in life, they need access to specialized treatment, which currently is not available within this refugee camp. And for that, they need more support than they're currently getting.
The the pictures show where we're supposed to sit. So you sit over here, I sit over here. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Michael Stephenson. I'm the founder and the director of Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've been working at planning this event for quite some time, only to have nature intervene at the very last minute. But thank you to all of you who made the special effort to get out tonight. I'm going to start the discussion questions with Jean-Nicolaa, and then I'd invite others to come to the microphones here at the front of the room to ask their questions as well. The first question that I wanted to ask was, and you've answered this in part, there is a refugee crisis in the world. Is there a refugee crisis in Canada?
No. And I hope that everybody in this room is convinced already, but if you are not, let me give you why we don't believe there's a refugee crisis in Canada, despite some media, some politicians, some civil society activists having described what's happening in Lacolle, so on the Quebec side, with the irregular arrival, so people who are crossing the border not at an official entry point, not at an official border entry point, but in between entry points to claim asylum in Canada is not a crisis. They have to cross in between, not at an official point, because of what is referred to as the Safe Third Country Agreement, which is the mechanisms by which the US and Canada agreed to share responsibilities in terms of asylum seeker, what you call here refugee claimants. The point was that we should avoid people having to go, or having the possibility to go to two systems at the same time, when the two systems have a lot of similarities. The US, Canada, recognize refugees based on the same definition, have a number of check and balances, are based on the rule of law, have robust judicial review justice system, and therefore there was a decision by those two countries to say, we are going to share the burden. Assessing with an asylum seeker who should be protected as a refugee it's human resources intensive, it costs money, so we don't want people to be claiming asylum on the two sides of the border at the same time. It's not unique. European countries have done exactly the same with the famous Dublin Agreement, where they say, okay, if you come to Italy, you claim asylum in Italy, but you won't be entitled to claim asylum in Germany, in Spain, and in France at the same time, because it doesn't make sense. We are going to review your case once for all, because we all belong to Europe. Same between the US and Canada. If you look at the numbers, last year, it's 20,000 people who crossed irregularly, and it's not illegal to cross an international border, not at an official point of entry, if you do that to claim asylum. Why? Because we are the international community is quite aware that refugees do not necessarily have the time to get a passport, and certainly do not have the time and the means often to get a visa. Your house is being bombed, you just leave. You don't necessarily go to the drawers of your in your bedroom to get your passport, or before leaving you go back to whatever Service Canada, the equivalent of Service Canada, to renew your passport. No, you leave because you are saving your life. So it makes sense that some refugees are unable. It's not that they don't want, but unable simply to cross an international border through regular means with a proper passport and a proper visa. So 20,000 came last year. Probably, as we speak, we are around the same number for this year. And total number of asylum seekers or refugee claimants in Canada last year amount to 50,000 people. 50,000 people, it's one day in Cox's Bazar last year during the Rohingya refugee crisis. And Cox's Bazar, it's not Montreal. It's not a place where you have electricity, potable running water out of the tap, functioning state, opportunities for people to get a job, and so on and so forth. It's Cox's Bazar. So when we speak about refugee crisis, we are speaking really about what's happening in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, what's happening now in Central America, in Latin America, where not only the numbers are important, but also the capacities of the countries receiving those refugees is extremely limited because they already struggle with issues of poverty and development for their own population. So a crisis is when 1 million South Sudanese refugees, as I was mentioning, cross into northern Uganda, where you already have limited capacity for the Ugandans to have access to potable water. That's a crisis. Not when 20 or even 50,000 people arrive to a country like Canada, or the US, or Europe, even when Europe received 1 million refugees, many Syrian, Afghan, Iraqi in the summer of 2015, it's not a crisis because the European market, the European economy, the European health system, the European educational system was able and demonstrated that it was able to absorb this increase. And just to finish on my response, the government, both at the provincial level, at the federal level, but also at the municipal level and the communities around Lacolle, for example, have demonstrated that they have managed completely this increase of numbers, which, again, remain minimal and was very well managed in terms of services provided to the people who arrived to claim asylum. And if you look at who are, again, behind the numbers, we are, again, speaking about people fleeing persecution because of who they are, women who were fleeing domestic violence or rape and could not get support in their own country, LGBTQ members, people who were fleeing Aleppo or Iraq or Afghanistan and had no other choice but to come. And when you save your life, you take the first door which is open. And if the first door is Lacolle or non-official border point, you take that road. So I hope that I've convinced you that there is no crisis. And I really encourage, sorry, Dr. Mayen, but I really encourage you to spread the word, because we are really fighting against a lot of myth here, a lot of stereotyping, a lot of negative rhetoric, a lot of populist rhetoric around who is arriving in Canada and why those people are arriving. They are not illegal. They are not bogus claims. They are not jumping any queue. The queue of immigration is a totally different queue than the one of asylum seeker or refugee claimant. So we need to, I think we need to be very vigilant about each time we hear those myths, those facts which are distorted. We need to actually correct the interlocutors, because the negativity spread much more rapidly than the positive narrative.
Great. Changing gears a little bit, some in the audience here that I've seen tonight were private sponsors of refugees. And one of the things that struck me when I moved to Kitchener-Waterloo a few years ago is just the number of private sponsor groups there are in this community. You know, folks in New Hamburg and Elmira and all over, you know, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph. Many of them were involved in sponsoring Syrian refugee families. And those families have become settled in the years since. And I've heard from a few groups saying they're interested in sponsoring another family to come to Canada. And they're torn between those who are friends and family of their first sponsored families and going the route of BVOR or going the route of those that UNHCR has selected as being in highest need. I wonder what you would say to those sponsorship groups facing that dilemma.
I think the added value of bringing extended family members of already resettled refugees is not being questioned here. I think we know that for the mental state of mind of refugees in Canada, it's extremely important to know that their loved ones are also safe, and therefore one way of making them safe is taking them from wherever they are and try to bring them here. We know that the family network for all of us is extremely important, and being separated from the grandparents, from the uncle, from the cousin is already difficult when you are in the two part of the family are in safe countries, but imagine when you still don't know whether your cousin, your uncle, your grandparents are going to make it on a daily basis when they are still in Lebanon or in Tanzania or in Mexico. So I want to emphasize that this is something that we as UNHCR recognize. But we have other pressing issues. For UNHCR, if we do not have the support of Canadians through the BVOR and through the sponsorship of refugees that we have identified as in need, we are losing life. And I always tell the same story because that's one which will probably stay with me the longest before leaving Lebanon. We had, and Dr. Mike will be able to weigh in from a medical point of view. We had a family with a little boy who had a muscular atrophy. Ultimately, from what we understand from the doctors, he was going to suffocate because the lungs were going to be crushed. So it was a priority case for us to send this family, these little kids, to a third country where he could receive medical attention. And we were told, I don't know whether it's true, that in the Western world, in a country like Canada or my country, France, that would not have been a big deal to actually at least limit the progression of this muscular atrophy. The family was coming almost every week at our office to ask when are they going to depart. And one day, the mother poured fuel on herself and cracked a match. So she put herself on fire. She was rushed to the emergency room. I think she stayed there for 3 weeks. She died. It was definitely a desperate call for help. She wanted to bring the attention to a child, to a family situation. The father lost it, had a nervous breakdown. We ended up with 3 kids, including this little one with the muscular atrophy, having to find a foster family. And that could have been completely avoided if we had had a country or a group of sponsors in Canada who had volunteered to take care of this family. So we are really speaking about life-saving intervention when you mobilize your energy, your goodwill, sometimes your money. I mean, part of it is also a financial contribution to help refugees that we identify, like this little boy, as in need of a solution in Canada. That's the difference. Well-being, life-saving. And I think there is space in this country for the two to go together. I think what you are doing when you sponsor a relative is extremely important in terms of helping this refugee family, extended family, to integrate and to be able to bounce back and contribute more rapidly, probably, to Canadian society. But we need to keep this space for the most vulnerable. And speaking of the most vulnerable, we have, out of the 25 millions, we have 1.4 million identified by UNHCR in need of resettlement as a life-saving intervention. And this year, countries globally are going to give us 70,000 spaces. 70,000 out of 1.4 million. And because of the reduction of the numbers by the US, we lost 50% of the species for those solutions in a year time. So the situation is pretty critical. And for every single situation like the little boy I was mentioning, you can multiply that by 1.4 million.
Jean-Nicolas, you are a newcomer to Canada.
Indeed.
2 years? Is that
2
right?
years.
2 years. Putting aside the politics, what are we as Canadians doing right, and what should we be doing more of, in your opinion?
I think that our High Commissioner came last year in November, and we had a lot of discussion on knowing what are we going to ask the government of Canada? What are we going to ask the Canadians to do? We need to recognize that this country has demonstrated a strong leadership on the refugee issues. We need to recognize that a large number of Western countries are closing their door to refugees. Maybe not building walls, but definitely slamming the door on the face of refugees. Canada has not done that. We need to recognize that the real heroes of the response to the refugee crisis are actually the frontline countries, and even more the frontline communities, neighboring countries in conflict, who have opened not only their border, but also their house, their hospital, their school. The Lebanese people, the Bangladeshi people, the Tanzanian people, the Ugandan people, the Mexican people. Those are the real heroes. And that's where, when we were discussing that with the High Commissioner, we were like, in a way, we need to recognize that Canada is doing a great job, especially compared to his sister or brother countries, no, in the global north or the Western world. But we came up with the fact that we really think, and Kitchener-Waterloo is demonstrating that, I think, every day, Canada and Canadians can do more. You have the space to do more. You have the space because you need demographically new blood. You have a number of jobs which are not being filled. You need the workforce. But I think also one thing which is very important for me as a European, you are a really diverse and multicultural society. So everybody arriving here will be able to connect with somebody who shares some cultural affinities. There is really in Canada a level of tolerance and acceptance for different religions, for different ways of eating, for different ways of praying, or different gods that are being prayed, or for sexual orientation, that is quite unique in the world, where a number of other countries are really struggling with this dimension of diversity. So you have the capacity to integrate and to provide the necessary support for people to become part of this society, because they will be able to relate to their own brother and sister, but very rapidly to the broader Canadian community. And that's where we think that you need to remain engaged. I think it's very important, as all of you, I mean, you are all adults here, vote, that you pass this message to your elected official, that there is possibility for Canada to do even more than what it is doing now. It's more resettlement, it's more BVOR, it's more integration services, it's support to associations like the one of, or the clinic like the Sanctuary Clinic, so that we really have a success in integrating refugees, in considering refugees not as burden, but really as people who could even come as economic migrants to this country, because they come with diploma, with experience, with professional experience, with skill, with talent, and say, can we open the stream of economic newcomers to the refugees? Can we give them a boost by helping them to come not on humanitarian grounds, but simply recognizing that they will be useful for our economy, for our society, and ultimately continuing asking for Canada to play a leadership role on the international scene. It's not only the funding. We need the funding from the Canadian government. We need the funding from the Canadian. But we need also the political leadership in demonstrating to other countries, to other communities, to other nations, that there is a different narrative that we can have on refugees. Because the wind is turning in the wrong direction in more and more countries. And Canada, I think, I know, I've been witnessing that for 2 years, has the capacity to tell a different story to the rest of the world and engage the rest of the world on a different narrative, on a different level, on a different type of discussion on how actually we are helping refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants and foreigners all together.
I could keep asking you questions all evening, but I think I better not. Maybe I'll call Kaylee to come back up, and the rest of you can get your questions ready for Jean-Nicolas.
Sure. So as we move to, am I on? So as we move to an open Q&A session, I just want to make a note that we're not expecting, but also want to note that we will not be okay with disrespectful language, hate, or heckling. And so I also note that there are people here with varying degrees of understanding of this topic. Experts to maybe this is your first time hearing about this issue. So feel encouraged to ask a question regardless of where you're at. So feel free to come up to one of the 2 mics on either side of the room. Introduce yourself, your name, pose your question, keep it brief, and note that we will not answer case-specific questions, but would be happy to connect with you afterwards about case-specific questions. So feel free to come. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll start with this side since you're here first.
Hi, I'm Ryan. So as a young person who's going to live through a climate-changing world, I'm expecting every decade for there to be more and more refugees. And I'm glad you brought up what was going on in Quebec, where just a small amount of disorder turned even the famously welcoming Canadians into scared and retreating into populism. So what has to be true for us to live in a world with increasing amount of refugees, likely increasing disorder, but still be welcoming? And what has to change in us as a society to prepare for that world?
Do you want to take several questions?
Sure, yeah, let's take this question as well.
Hi, my name is Afna, and I'm actually a staff member from Sanctuary. I wanted to address the topic of climate change and climate refugees, and I put that in quotation. And I wanted to ask you, as a representative of UNHCR, how, ethically speaking, how the UNHCR is dealing with displacement from climate and environmental issues, especially because there's such a high need of issues from war and displacement of persecution. So I'm just wondering from that angle. Thank you.
And we'll take this one more here as well.
So my question is, my name's Andrea, and I'm a student here in town. My question is around more local initiatives that have been taken to address the unique needs of gender or sexual minority refugees. Yeah, thank you.
So the first question is really the $1 million question that probably all politicians in Europe have failed to respond to, since we see the rise in populisms and in far-right movement. And it's really a question that is hitting the domestic, Canada political scene, is how do we ensure that despite the fact that the numbers, when we speak about the numbers, when we speak about the profile, we still cannot counter the negative rhetorics around people arriving spontaneously to Canada, whether regularly or irregularly, and claim asylum in this country. I've been told by many communication experts, but I'm not one of them, that it's we tend often to believe that people take decisions based on their, I don't remember whether it's the left brain or the right brain, but the rational part of the brain. Which one is that?
Oh gosh, you're putting me on the spot. Brain, I think. Left brain, I think. Yeah.
Okay,
We'll
say something.
We'll say left.
Somebody may be Googling it now and we'll have the response by the end of the evening. And that actually, on those issues, we should more look at value, and it's often a value judgment. It's often an emotional connection. So I think we need to do more here and elsewhere to really connect people with refugees, so that they have a first-hand experience of who are those people. We heard, I think it was from you at the dinner, of situation where neighbors who saw refugees being sponsored in their own community, village, or neighborhood, having really concern, and then after a while getting to know them, seeing that they are like you and me, and that actually you may be sharing a lot of similarities. You may be a cancer survivor yourself, and you realize that actually, this woman who is next to me is also a cancer survivor, but she's coming here because cancer treatment was not available as a refugee wherever she was in the first place. Or that, so trying to really multiply the opportunities for a larger number of Canadians to get in touch, get to know, get involved with refugees. I think it's probably the best things to do, rather than trying to just explain again and again the legal framework and the numbers, and reassuring everybody that the police and the border authorities are doing their job properly, because that does not anymore resonate with people. So getting engaged through the sponsors and making sure that when you sponsor refugees, as long as the refugees are happy to do that, but help them to get out and have more and more Canadians exposed to what it means to be refugees. The only thing where I think we still need to do more in terms of number and facts is demonstrating that refugees are not an economic burden, are not taking away from the Canadian taxpayer, or are not taking away from Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet, and that actually refugees are a contributor to the society. They have two more chances than Canadian-born citizens, how do you say that? Twice more, twice as likely of creating jobs for themselves, but also for other Canadians, including Canadian-born citizens. They are much more entrepreneurial because they know it's a survival coping mechanism. We know that they have the highest success in terms of citizenship, more than any other newcomers, economic newcomers, and so on. They want to integrate. We know that their kids, sorry for those who didn't stand up and who are born, or their parents were born in Canada, because actually you do less well than refugee kids at university level and secondary school. So that's the narrative we need to bring to the fore. On the issue of climate change, it was a good reminder to say that probably people come with different level of understanding and knowledge about, in particular, the legal issues. But refugees are really limited to a group of people who are persecuted, individually persecuted, or sometimes as a group when it's a conflict, and who are at risk of losing their life if they don't get out and get the protection of another state. The state is not willing or unable to protect them, and therefore they cross the border and claim the protection of another state. climate and all the environmental situations, it does not amount to a refugee status because there's no persecution by the state. Often the state is doing its best to address and mitigate the impact of climate changing and environmental degradation. We need to remember how the definition was crafted. It's after the Second World War. It's to address really a specific issues of saying that we had millions of people on the road who had been displaced by the conflict in Europe. And we are not speaking only about the Jewish population. We are also speaking about Roma. We are also speaking about LGBTQ. We are speaking of different groups who had been persecuted and could not stay in their countries. I think if we expand the definition to climate change and others, we are going to dilute the definition, and definitely there is no consensus now to have a broader definition. The Western world in particular is not ready to accept people who are fleeing economic deprivation, poverty, or climate changing. That will mean if we do that, that will mean that probably 3/4 of the world population will be entitled to get protection in Canada, Europe, the US, and Australia. Because let's get real, 3/4 of the population is living below the poverty line as we speak. So I think one of the things we have to be careful about is that let's not try to use the refugee protection and the tools to address other issues which need to be addressed. Fighting against poverty, fighting against lack of development, fighting against discrimination of women when it comes to access to education or livelihood opportunities, and fighting against the impact of global warming and ecological degradation. We need to invest, but we don't need to use the refugee tools to fix that problem. We need to address it through the tools which are adapted to the problem, which is lack of development. And the last point about LGBTQ or sexual orientation and gender identity communities, I think Canada has been really in the forefront in that respect. Already, I don't know when was the first case, but quite a while ago, the Immigration and Refugee Board recognized that being persecuted because of his or her, or now the neutral term, their sexual orientation or gender identity is a ground to receive protection in Canada. Other countries have followed. UNHCR for quite a while has been promoting this to different countries, and we need to keep the attention to this particular group. But I want just to offer my own personal reflection. Let's not all jump off on our niche, on our pet topic. I think it's important that we look at the different vulnerabilities, and that we recognize that there is more. The different level of emergency in terms of providing solution for refugees in Canada. Not all LGBTQ refugees are necessarily at risk in the country where they found asylum. It's not only in Canada that LGBTQ can live a regular life. You will be surprised. I come from the Middle East, where there's a lot of taboo associated with those issues. But you will be surprised that if you have the right socioeconomic status, the right educational level, as an LGBTQ, you will not be necessarily be at risk, even if you are a refugee. And therefore, we need to really remain as objective as possible and saying we need to prioritize in terms of who has the most urgent, pressing needs. And that may be one day LGBTQ, but another day it may be a person with a disability, and a third day it may be a rape survivor. And we need to be careful about not just fighting. And I know this is not what you were implying in your question, but I just want to use this opportunity to say we need to be careful about just not fighting for our own people in a very narrow
siloed
view. Everybody deserves our equal attention.
Mm-hmm. So we'll take these last few questions, and these will be the last. So go ahead.
My name is Pam, and jumping off a comment that was made at the beginning about how goods can move across borders much more easily than people can, how can we reframe our thinking about borders?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ambeka, and I'm a student at the Balsillie School here. I personally have a lot of trouble navigating the media, especially when it comes to issues of migration. And I'm just wondering where you personally get your news from outside of internal UN communication, and if you have any strategies for us on how to navigate the conflicting media we often get.
Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a student. I just had a question about the definition of a refugee, because you're mentioning in response to the climate change question that there's a danger in adapting and changing up the definition for purposes of who to serve in the UNHCR. But I'm just wondering how, as society and times evolve from that post-World War II definition, what is that going to mean for the future? And on a personal note, if you see that definition ever adapting, and what dangers you think might come from not adapting it, or what benefits would be from keeping it. Thanks.
The border issue. We have to recognize that international law, and there are specialists in the room who can probably expand on what I'm going to say here. It's a system which is between states. The human rights framework, the international human rights framework, is actually one of the few which is a vertical relationship between the state and the individual. But the rest of the international relations is really a system of 193 states who need to get agreement on things. And one of the things which is the basis of international relation is the notion of state sovereignty. And state sovereignty is most clearly represented by a territory, a population, and control over this population and this territory, which means also delivering human rights and services for people living on this territory. But the territory is defined by borders. And therefore, I don't think we will really get away anytime soon with border. I know that there's a lot of without border organization, and I think in terms of advocacy and helping looking at issues beyond just a domestic problem, it's very important. But the border are not going to go away tomorrow. One thing which is important in terms of refugee movement is really what I mentioned vis-à-vis Lacolle and the fact that people crossing at an irregular point are not illegal and are actually protected under international law, but also Canadian law for doing that. Because there's not a single border in the world which is completely sealed off. People everywhere in the world are crossing through irregular means. Again, not everyone may have the possibility to get a passport, a visa. Some people definitely don't want to show up at the border side of their own country when they are being looked after by the secret police or by because they are political opposition members and so on. So the only way for them to get out is, of course, to do it through irregular means. And that we have to recognize that international law provides for them not to be punished for having done so. So it's not illegal, and I think we need to recognize that border exists for a whole set of reasons based on the state sovereignty, but that international law and members, the states have agreed that not everyone will be able to cross the border at a regular entry point with a passport and with a valid visa at the time they are doing it. So I'm not responding to the question, I'm quite aware, but I'm just trying to shift a little bit the discussion in saying the border should not be seen as necessarily something which does not allow people to still get the protection as refugees. The issues of the media and conflicting news, I know that it may be sounding, it may be sometimes a bit boring to read a report from international organizations like the United Nations. Most probably the CG report are far less boring than the UN report, but you have a wealth of resources out there. If you want any information about a country, you can really go on the website, for example, of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, our sister agency, which publishes reports almost on every single country in the world, which help you figure out what is reliable news or not when you are dealing with issues of good governance, rule of law, human rights violation and abuse. You can have access to those reports, which are most probably very objective, sometimes a bit dry to read, but which provide you the information. And I think in Canada we have the chance of having a free press and really look at different newspaper, different newsroom. What bothers me, if I may be completely frank, is the fact that sometimes I regret that the Canadian media are not more plugged into what's happening elsewhere, abroad. As a European, and because of the proximity that we have geographically with Africa, with the Middle East, the media have dedicated a lot of attention to situations which are not on the European territories. We are forced to. The connection is too close. The impact of what may be happening in North Africa or in the Middle East, as within a few weeks, we see it visibly on the European territory, so that's why probably the media are giving more attention. So I will encourage you also to look at perhaps some other media outlets out there which provide perhaps different type of information about what's happening a bit further away from Canada. The definition of refugees is evolving. Just one thing, the original definition did not include the persecution based on gender or based on sex. So basically, the definition was looking at political grounds, was looking at religious grounds, was looking at many things, but not being persecuted because you are a woman or because you are a member of the LGBTQ community. But in the definition, you have the notion of a particular social groups, and here I'm becoming very legalistic, which has been over the time being interpreted in a more all-encompassing way, meaning that now if a woman can prove that because of her sex, because of her gender, she's unable to receive the protection of the state, of her state, she is going to be recognized as a refugee. So the definition is evolving, but it's still looking at the element of individual persecution as what triggers the need for you to have the protection from another state than the state where you are born or where you have, from which you have your nationality. And again, it's not that we should not give attention to the other problem, but I think fixing those other problems through the refugee definition is dangerous. We see already erosion of the commitment of a number of states to the hardcore of the refugee definition. We have seen a number of countries who have said, if it's not a state actor, a public institution which is persecuting you, you are not going to be recognized as a refugee. So basically, if it's an armed group, if it's a criminal gang, but that the state is not doing anything to protect you, too bad for you, you will not be recognized as refugees. While the refugee definition is very clear. It's the incapacity or unwillingness of the state to protect you, whether the persecution is coming from Boko Haram or it's coming from your husband or your spouse beating you up and the police not reacting to the beating. You have to be recognized as refugees. So we have to be also mindful that all the gains that we had, it's the same situation with torture. We had a lot of gain. The definition of torture was adopted in 1984. A lot of progress being made. Comes 9/11, and suddenly a number of democracies thought, well, actually, if we torture people for the sake of getting information to prevent a terrorist act, perhaps it's not so bad to torture people. So we have to be I'm drawing always this comparison because we have to be mindful that these days, all the gains that we have made in the human rights field are being challenged. And therefore, expanding a definition to try to address other issues where we still have challenges of making countries respect the basic of the definition, in my personal view, is something a bit dangerous. And we are not sure, I personally don't think that the refugee definition will be able to solve all these other problems that we have been discussing, such as climate change, the issue of poverty and economic deprivation, for example.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. That brings to the end our the portion of tonight's agenda on with Jean-Nicolas and his thoughts around UNHCR. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to talk a little bit about our organization, Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre, and our involvement in the community. In 2013, I moved to town from Toronto and wanted to continue working with refugees like I had done in Toronto and in Montreal before that. I'm a family doctor, sort of generally trained, but with a special interest in this population. And I came to town and I met a few people who are in the audience tonight. I see Mira here, and I think I saw Lynn earlier. And they helped to convince me, and as well as speaking to refugees here in the community, who helped to convince me that a place for refugees to get healthcare was crucially needed, desperately needed in this community. And so without very much thought, we opened Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre. And it's exceeded our expectations since in terms of the need. Kaylee mentioned earlier, we started with 6 patients on our first day. One person showed up. He got great health care that day. And it's grown, and it's grown, and it's grown. And in 2015, when the current government took power, and we had something like 1,200 Syrian refugees arrive in 3 months, we grew and we grew and we grew, and we've grown since. We've grown astronomically. We're at 3,500 patients now. We have 400 people on our waiting list. These are people who have been unable to find care elsewhere in the community. And a lot of people ask me what makes Sanctuary, what makes it special? And sometimes I talk about the interpreters like Zainab, who's here, and like Serene and Mayada, who are there in person providing linguistic support in lots of different languages. I still don't know how many languages Zainab speaks. And people who can communicate, who can help us communicate one-on-one with our patients there in person. For little issues, for big issues. I can talk about people, some of the staff people that we have, people like Asma, who's here, who we've managed to convince Canadian Mental Health Association to pay Asma's salary so that she can be there as a social worker in the clinic providing care. I can talk about some of the special issues that make refugee healthcare different. Things like post-traumatic stress disorder, things like schistosomiasis or strongyloides. And yes, there'll be an examination later, and I expect you to remember those names. But really, the issue that's most important to me is community. I want people to experience this community the way that it is, without barrier. I want them to have the opportunities that are available in this community. Because if we take away those barriers for people, especially for refugees, they succeed, they thrive in ways that are beyond imagination. We have people opening businesses, we have people buying houses, we have people, we have some of the youth in our practice who are going to university, going to professional programs. They may be your doctor one day. I hope that to be the case. So allowing people to experience the KW community, I think, is fundamentally important because they're here, and not allowing them to experience the community is depriving them of community, and it's pushing them into a cycle of poverty and into a cycle of hopelessness, which we want to avoid by all means. The other issue that I think really makes refugees unique is that they have lost their community. And imagine if tonight I came up to you and said, hey, guess what? You have to leave everything that you know, and you're going to go to country X, where you know nobody, where you have no connections. And I'm going to expect you to know how to use this health card that maybe you can't read because you can't read the script. I'm going to expect you to know how to deal with your health problems, how to get your kids into school, and this, that, and the other thing. The things that we rely on the most, I think, are our community here. We rely on our loved ones to help us to succeed. We rely on them for information. We rely on them for support. And refugees lose that. They lose that community. And that's a devastating thing. And that's one of the things that prevents people from moving beyond the traumas that happen to them. And so I hope the staff that I work with every day at Sanctuary, I hope that even in a small way, we can replace that community that's being lost. And we can help to make that connection to people and help them to make KW home. We are undertaking a capital campaign. I'm probably the only doctor, the solo practice doctor in all of Canada who now has a 4,500 square foot office. We have that as a clinic because we're bringing other services in to work with us. We have partnerships, great partnerships. I mentioned CMHA, KW Multicultural Center, lots of great opportunities out there for people to come in and provide services on-site, the one-stop shop that Jean-Nicolas talked about. But we need more space to do that. We need more examination rooms. We need more supplies, more equipment. And so we are turning to you, the community, to help us to meet that goal. On our 5th year anniversary in April 2013, we asked for $100,000. And I am so excited to tell you that we are almost there. We're very close to being there. And I want to send a special thank you to Len and Brenda Jewett, who are here tonight. I can not see any of you, so maybe they'll just give a wave. They're there, over here. Len and Brenda, they have not been to the clinic. We met for the first time tonight, and yet they are our largest single donors in our history. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for your contribution. That put us almost to our $100,000 goal. And tonight, if you feel generous, I ask, come and meet one of us with a Sanctuary sticker on our lapel. We'd love to talk to you about it. We'd love to tell you how to donate. I'm gonna ask them to play a quick video here now about Sanctuary that I think really talks about what we do in our clinic. Hi, my name is Dr. Mike Stephenson. I'm the founder and director of Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre here in Kitchener. We started in 2013 in a church basement on King Street. We started with 1 patient on our first day, and we're now above 3,000. We're currently running a capital campaign to expand the clinic to provide the kind of high quality care to our newcomer refugees here in Kitchener that will allow them to thrive and succeed in Canada.
We know that when the needs are there, we want to act on them. We care about the patients first and foremost. We don't see this as just a job.
I've never seen client comes, Mike say, no, I don't have time, or can you do it tomorrow? Even if the late time he will spend. And listening, oh my God, I have never seen, I told you.
Our system is based around being able to communicate properly with our patients. It becomes very difficult to provide healthcare when you don't have a common understanding, a common language, or a common experience that people have had.
The most important thing I found it with Dr. Michael, he listened to us carefully. The first 50% remedy by listening, you know? Yes. Then the medication or something like this. I was okay.
So we're trying to raise $100,000 in order to lease new space and expand, to renovate the physical space, in order to add examination rooms so that we can have more providers here on site, so that people don't have to go across the city for different services, that they can come to one place and have all their needs met. Big one of those is mental health. We also we're providing settlement services on site through collaborations with the Multicultural Center. We have caseworkers from social assistance coming. We have a psychologist who comes. We're engaging a psychiatrist to come as well. So we're looking at the services that patients need and trying to house them all in one site.
And a woman literally collapsed on our front doorstep, and she was pregnant. She had just arrived 3 days prior from an African nation that's in conflict, and she had had no antenatal care up until that point, and she was very visibly very unwell. She was not a patient of ours yet. She hadn't made a refugee claim yet, so she had no health coverage and nowhere else to go, so she came to Sanctuary. We were able to determine she was in acute crisis. She was septic with a malaria flare-up in pregnancy, which can have critical consequences for both mother and baby. And so we were able to quickly triage her, get her admitted to hospital, coordinate her care with both infectious disease and the antenatal sort of medicine program there. And in all of this, she had a young family, and they had no one supporting them who was able to watch the children while they were in hospital. And so it was actually our volunteers here who came together and watched the children for the 4 days that she was admitted to hospital. They just came to the clinic, and it was like a day camp for them. And when she was discharged from hospital, we were able to take her on as a patient and follow the pregnancy through. And so just by being there and being able to see that patient with no notice, with no history on her, and know which services to access, a year later now we have a healthy mom and a healthy baby girl, and they come to Sanctuary and they call it their second home.
We try to, wherever possible, manage patients here without sending them to the hospital, because we know that we have the resources here to take better histories, to gain a better understanding of the illness experience. We don't want to see our patients using the ER unnecessarily. We want to be able to be there for them when they're having their what they perceive as an emergency issue. We know that we can divert some of the pressure off the emergency room. We've shown that in previous research that we've done, that with targeted interventions, we can actually get people to come here to get assessed first, and divert a lot of the ER visits. But that requires space, that requires people who can communicate with our patients, people who can follow up with our patients. It requires more resources than the average family doctor's office has, a lot less resources than an emergency room has. So it's cost-effective interventions. We can provide the kind of high-quality care that people need at the time that they need it, and save the system money.
So you've learned a little bit more about the state of the world's refugees. You've learned about the ongoing needs in various source countries. And you've heard that there are more refugees than there have ever been, and less global resettlement spaces, less countries being willing to provide support and resettle. You've heard the encouragement from Jean-Nicolaa in saying, Canada, you can do more. And so I encourage us as students, as academics, as practitioners, members of civil society, to continue having this conversation within your circles and thinking through at a time where there is a reform that's going on in looking at creative, out-of-the-box solutions, thinking through ways refugees can be considered in complementary pathways through economic streams, to continue having these conversations within your spheres of influence and thinking through ways Canada can continue being a leader internationally and continuing to spread the narrative that refugees are a blessing when given the opportunity to resettle to a country like ours. And you've heard about the incredible work of Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre and a local way that you can currently actively get involved in supporting an agency that is providing incredible support in a unique way in our country. So thank you for coming. Thank you for taking your time, risking your lives a little bit in that drive here to learn a little bit more about this. And so I encourage you to consider supporting the continued creation of Sanctuary in this community by donating to Sanctuary Refugee Health Centre. Details on how to donate here on this screen. Visit the booth outside, connect with Dr. Mike and their team. I also encourage you to visit some of the informational booths for some of our partners, Mennonite Central Committee, the KW Multicultural Center, and the International Migration Research Center. So stick around a bit, drive home safe, and thanks for coming. Have a great night.
Merci.